Welcome to Adoptee Thoughts, the podcast where we explore the complex and often untold stories of adoption. I'm your host, Melissa Guida Richards, adoption educator and star-reviewed author of What White Parents Should Know About Transracial Adoption and its companion workbook. Each week, we'll delve into the nuances of adoption, unpacking the challenges, perspectives, and difficult conversations that come with it. Whether you're an adoptee, adoptive parent, or simply curious about the realities beyond the mainstream narrative, this space is for honest, thought-provoking discussions. We won't shy away from the tough topics because they matter. So thank you for joining in, and let's get into today's episode of Adoptee Thoughts. All right, can you please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your adoption story?
Yeah, my name is Connor. I was adopted as an infant, born in San Diego, raised in San Diego, but my story kind of started in Ireland. My mom is an American, and she was living in Ireland at the time, got pregnant unexpectedly, and basically, from everything I know, my dad was not interested in parenting me. My mom flies back to the U.S. at some point in her pregnancy, and at some point decides to relinquish me for adoption. Um, yeah, I don't really know what was going on in her head at the time. I've talked to her about it. I've read, her words about it in my adoption papers and stuff, my non-identifying information. Um, but ultimately, I grew up in like a quote unquote open adoption. Really, like I would say probably one of the first. I mean, maybe not one of the first ever, but I know plenty of adopted people. I've talked to plenty of adopted people. Not many people my age or older growing up in open adoptions, and so
Mhm.
we lived in the same city. I saw my mom like I don't know, my mom being my like quote unquote birth mom or whatever. I saw my mom probably like once every year or two, I would say. Um, and she's lived in a lot of places over the years, but as an adult, I would say it's pretty much like I have two families. Like I have my adoptive family and my other family. Um, and had all kinds of, whatever, the typical adoption experience, all the feelings of being adopted and all that. And at a certain point, basically, my kid was born, my first kid a few years ago. And that was really when I started to say a lot of the feelings that I felt my whole life, I guess, out loud to people in my families. And at this point, I'd been listening to adopted people speak in podcasts. I mean, I've listened to you and Haley and all the adopted people, read a lot of books, all this stuff. And at a certain point, I was like, I feel like I hear a lot of people saying things about adoption, and I was looking at what do adoption agencies say, what does the industry say, and it was a lot of, well, open adoption fixes things. Open adoption makes everything better. I'd go into support groups, I'd be in therapy, and I was like, I feel like I'm having kind of all the same feelings as all these other adopted people. I
Right.
mean, granted, I have a different experience. I have more access to information and people that other people, might not have access to. But I also, at the same time, also still have this dad and this family in Ireland I've never met. So I kind of have both, I guess, experiences. And and yeah, I mean, ultimately, I started talking online about this stuff. Despite whatever reservations I've had, and I don't know. I just feel like it really bothered me that so many people would just kind of assume that open adoption fixed everything, or maybe not even
Mhm.
assume, but just kind of say that it does without actually asking anyone. Because, having like lived the experience I've lived and spoken to the people I've spoken to in my life, like, I think I don't think there's much different, honestly, between open and closed beyond just kind of information we have access to. You can grow up with your family and seeing your family once every year or two. But what really makes that much different than the other side of, not knowing someone? I don't know. Not to say that it's definitely like it's better in a lot of ways, but it doesn't all of a sudden just I think in open adoption they always talk about open adoption like making adopted people whole or making like I don't know, fix erasing the trauma or whatever. And it's just like yeah, that's not really how it works. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I got into my little spiel there, but that's kind of my story. I don't know. I can answer any questions or anything. Like I feel like I lived a very normal life, I would say, for being an adopted person. Had a lot of the adversities adopted people have. I have a brother who's like only a few months younger than me, who's a biological child of my adoptive family. So that created a
Hmm.
lot of like tension and chaos in the house, I guess. But um, I know that my biggest critics will always say, or yours too, probably any one of us who's speaking out, oh, well, they just, are traumatized or they're unhappy or they're, fill in the blank about we have all these problems.
Miserable.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, I am miserable in a lot of ways, but like at the same time, it's not like I didn't live this totally pretty much normal life by adoption standards. So, yeah, that's kind of my story.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I definitely understand the vibe where you're coming from, where people just say like, well, most adoptions in the United States are open now, like so, like all the families included, so that kind of reinforces their happily ever after narrative. Like it's like, see, we fixed the problem. It's okay. We put a bow on it, not realizing that there are challenges with open adoptions as like whether you started when the child was young or an infant or older. Like now, I guess my adoption is kind of open because I'm reunited with my birth mom, but
Mhm.
just because I have her in my life doesn't magically make the adoption trauma and like other struggles that I went through from being an orphan and all that stuff just wash away. So I think that's really important that you share that part of your story. I think it's also really essential that you are a male voice in this community because we have so few, I think, that are very vocal. I think I can count all the male voices that I just from like top of my head, like on one hand, like
Yeah, there's only a few of us.
Moses, and even when like I read books and interviews and stuff, like it's still like a very small percentage. And I was curious what you think might be the reason for that.
Yeah, I get that question a lot, honestly, and I've never really felt like I've had a good answer for it. In support groups, in like any group of adopted people, it always feels like there's many more women. I think the answer I've given before, or at least like what's off the top of my head, is number one, I think it's like when you're a man, there's kind of this expectation of you to like, be tough and not have feelings and all this stuff. And I definitely grew up that way. But also, I think. And this might be a little cynical of me, but I definitely think it might have something to do with it. I mean, obviously, let's just say also, in terms of like the politics of adoption, you have all the Chinese adopted people are predominantly women. So there is just by virtue of that, there's going to be
Hmm.
more, women represented in our group of people. But I think also, and maybe the same is true in, other circumstances as well from other countries, but and you know this as well as I do, that adoption is like a supply and demand marketplace, and the people who want to adopt, I would argue, by and large, historically, have always been much more interested in girls than boys. And so, I mean, I don't know how much of a variable that is, but like, I don't think it's crazy to think that that could have something to do with it. And yeah, as far as like, I mean, I know other guys that are adopted, and I just think, yeah, there's just always, I mean there's this pressure, I guess, for everyone, whether they're a man or a woman who's adopted, to not, have feelings about this stuff or to not say this stuff out loud. But I think it
Hmm.
becomes more difficult if you're a guy in some ways. Not to say it's, any more or less for anyone, but I just think when you're a guy, you're seen as soft when you have these problems about adoption. And for me, it was like I had daddy issues and mommy issues, but it was always easier to have the daddy issues because I don't know. It's like when you're a guy, you're allowed to have daddy issues, but not allowed to have mommy issues. Also, it might have just been that I have this dad in Ireland who I don't know anything about, so it's easier to be
Yeah.
upset about that. And I have access to my mom, so it's like there's a level of like, how much is there to complain about when I do have her in my life? But I think it was just kind of, at least for me growing up, it felt more acceptable to be pissed at my dad than it was to be, not to say that I was mad at either of them, but just like to associate whatever issues or struggles I had
Yeah, the
with
tension.
with the problems with my dad and that family than it was to have the problems of I only see my mom once a year. I only see my mom, once every 2 years or whatever. I go this long without seeing my mom, even though I'm begging to see her. And who's to say, like, I don't know, who really knows like the reasons for that connection doesn't happen as often, or why it's not as important to people as like I want it to be. I just in general, I think it's really, and you were saying earlier that what are you talking about? Like the openness, right? And every people say, oh, every adoption is open now. Open adoption is such a deliberately misleading term because it can mean
Hmm.
anything. It can, like, your adoption was always open. If you like, by the standards of, closed versus open legally, if like you always had access to information about what your mother's name is,
Yep.
that counts as open. My adoption is also open, but clearly very different experience just by virtue of like the way I grew up, the way you grew up, right?
Hmm.
One of us is like classified as an orphan at some point. One of us is not never classified as an orphan. Same on paper, we're both open adoption if the adoption agency wants to call us that. Um, and for me, like, I'm in an open adoption when I don't see my mom and when I see my mom. It doesn't
Hmm.
change, even though it's like those are different experiences. So, yeah, it's just frustrating because obviously, like, the language that is always used is like predicated on painting adoption as this wonderful thing, or painting our experience as the best it can possibly be, and really limiting like the amount of like struggles that people can even quantify in their brain of like what we might be experiencing. Like, oh, well, if it's open, it must mean that they know each other. That must mean that they
Hmm.
see each other, because it's not closed. And closed means, right, like closed secret adoptions era or whatever, which obviously, like, yeah, it's so much. The experiences are different for everyone, even if they have
Yeah.
the exact same thing on paper. But um, yeah,
I
I
feel
don't
a
know.
lot of the vocabulary is deliberately misleading, and in some ways, like it's painted as like, oh, open adoption, that means like the birth parents are in the child's life. Like that's like the idea that they kind of promote. Meanwhile, that's they don't want you to get into the nuances and the actual reality of what it is, so they leave it vague too. So it's just a mess
Yeah.
that
And
like all
a
these.
little fun fact, the open adoption language was like the positive adoption language was literally
Mhm.
created by someone who was adamantly opposed to open adoption. That's a fun fact that I learned from
Mhm.
I will just say, a relative of the person who created it. So,
That's really cool. What year were you adopted in?
95. That's when I was born.
95. Okay. So you were like a newborn adoption.
Yes.
Um, do you know if your adoptive parents were at the hospital when you
They
were
cut my
born?
umbilical cord.
Wow. Okay. Oh, speaking of cutting umbilical cords, I think this is a good segue to the internet's favorite hopeful adoptive parent right now, Liz. I know in one of her failed, quote unquote, failed adoptions that she has shared, she cut the umbilical cord too.
Oh, gee,
And
I forgot about that.
yeah, yeah. That one, it really like they all rub me the wrong way, but that one especially, I'm just like, how could you even like say this with a straight face? Like all of her posts on this. And for those who are just listening in, Liz is a hopeful adoptive parent who posted and went viral on TikTok multiple times for talking about her three failed adoptions. She tried to get matched with an infant and was at the hospital many of the times, and the adoptions fell through for various reasons. And she's repeatedly posted over these past few weeks and kind of made it her, I think, like her backup plan to agency matching not working. And she's pretty much outright said on a few posts that like she hopes that she can complete her family with the help of TikTok. And you've had like a bunch of posts on her, and I'd love to like just dig into your head for a little bit because I love your content and how you just like go for it. Like you really don't sugarcoat a lot of things, which is just like my favorite thing because a lot of adoptees are like constantly, trying to tiptoe around adoption topics, especially when it comes to things like women struggling with infertility and then choosing adoption and trying to save a baby and whatnot. I'd love to know like your first impressions of Liz and maybe like if you can remember the first video of hers that you saw.
Yeah, basically, as soon as she started, I think her name is like Lynn's Jax or something. But basically, the second that she started posting, I was getting messages from people. Like people will always, whenever there's like a big story people want me to
Hmm.
cover, they'll always send it to me. And I was like, I mean, I will just, little inside baseball. I just had a kid very recently, and I don't know if I was maybe even in the hospital when people start, maybe not, but I was very close to the birth of my child that she started posting. And so I'm seeing this stuff, but I'm like, okay, I don't really know how quickly I can get to this, but I definitely wanted to because anytime people are complaining about quote unquote failed adoptions, it's like I love talking about that. Um, but yeah, I'm seeing it, and all of this. I mean, that's the thing. She goes on a brand new account, and she's at like 30,000 followers right now on TikTok. That's crazy. I've been posting for like almost 2 years probably on TikTok, and I just hit like 10,000, I want to say. So for her, like these videos went super super viral, and then of course she has the additional layer of posting literally like the video of someone else's child or picture of someone else's child on her thing. And whenever I see people do that, the thing is ultimately, and you probably know this as well as I, like for me, my whole goal is like to talk about adoption or to leverage kind of like these whatever scandals, dramas, controversies in a way that makes people like kind of think more, ask more questions about adoption, or
Hmm.
think about adoption in a more critical way. Not even to say they should hate adoption, but just like, should we think about adoption the way that we currently think about adoption? And yeah, anytime people are posting someone else's children, I think is a very good. People on the internet can understand that they can be on your side regardless. When the whole whatever her name was, Shelby, posted a video about foster care baby, and like
Yeah.
any time that someone posts a video of a child that they do not have legal like whatever custody over, it is just something that the internet will be on your side for that. And so for me, that was a very like, okay, people will be on my side if I start posting about this. What am I going to do? And so yeah, I took some time. I was like reading her or watching her videos as they came out. I think she posted 9 parts total, and it was like 3 failed adoptions, parts for each one, and then she posted 2 like just broad videos that actually did way better than the whole series or whatever. But
Hmm.
yeah, for me, I was really interested in kind of like what, where does she adopt? Like, what does the process look like for her? And how does this happen? I mean, honestly, it's kind of insane to think about someone matching and failing to adopt like 3 times in such quick succession. I don't know what the timeline was for her. I want to say it was all pretty close together. I want to say it was like within the course of 5 months. And I mean, if you're trying to adopt like a normal person through a normal adoption agency, you're lucky to get matched one match in 5 months, let
Yeah.
alone
Yeah.
3. Um, and I went through her following, and of course, she's following adoption consultants, just like the same people that every other influencer I talk about is following and actually promoting on their pages. And so I was like, of course. And so yeah, basically from there, I'm like, okay, so now I have all these little, dots to connect or whatever, where okay, we got to talk about failed adoption. We got to talk and why that's not actually a failure. We got to talk about posting other people's kids on the internet. We got to talk about, these adoption consultants. And also, like a huge theme, and I talked about it in my videos, is the fact that, 2 of these 3 fathers were not even on listed on the birth certificates of their own children, despite the fact that they were both there. They were both around. And
Hmm.
in one of my videos, I made a point to say, like, I was adopted in the 90s. I have a father who lives in Ireland, like in the middle, in like rural Ireland. Like, you would think this guy would never be signing my adoption papers. And granted, I don't know, maybe someone forged a signature or something, but that guy's signature, at least his name is written, signed on my adoption papers. And
Yeah.
I'm like, if you can get this guy in the middle of Ireland in the 90s, a guy who wants nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my mom, to sign adoption papers, how can you not get a guy who is down the street who wants to be in his child's life to not sign adoption papers? So for me, that was a big issue, and that's just something I always feel like I want to talk about more is this idea
Hmm.
that like these adoption agencies or entities, whether it's the agency, the lawyer, whoever, they want to facilitate adoptions, and I feel
Hmm.
like for as much as no noise as people want to make about Lindsay as a person, I think that she, did a lot of things the wrong way, making really racist comments, all kinds of stuff. Like at the
Hmm.
end of the day, my biggest grievance is that we just accept the rest of this as normal. Oh, she got
Yeah.
matched 3 times in 5 months. Why are we not asking questions about that? Why,
Hmm.
why is she complaining about these fathers, or like why is she telling this whole story as if it's totally normal for fathers to not be listed on the birth certificates of their own children when they're trying to get their children? And then she's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to fight them for custody of their kids or whatever. I mean, that was a big part too. Like I think the second story she told, she has this kid for like 2 or 3 weeks. At the same
Yeah.
time, she's battling a legal battle against the father to try to get him not to get custody over his child. And then she's disappointed when he gets custody over his child. And it's just like, I mean, this is really what adoption represents politically. I think somewhere on my profile somewhere, it's like my bio or whatever is like, I want to talk about like the political realities of adoption. Like adoption happens in many circumstances because of things like this, where you have
Hmm.
an adoption entity that stands to make money on adoption and is thinking, well, this guy is a barrier between me and this, check I'm about to cash. So let
Yeah.
me make him jump through a bunch of arbitrary hoops. He has to go on this putative father registry, which who knows what a putative father registry even
Yeah.
is.
So many people have
Um,
no idea.
why would anyone? It's designed to make it hard for them. I never knew about this stuff till I started reading about adoption stuff. So you have to know the kid is born, which they don't tell you. You have to,
Hmm.
know to go to this random, like, let's call it a website or a newspaper or whatever, and put in your information and say, hey, I had a kid that was born on this at this time on this day, and this is my kid, even though you don't have access to that information. And then, there's still even like there's ways that lawyers and courts and whatever can say, well, you don't really care about your kid because this or this or that. Like, it's just designed to screw fathers out of their rights, quite frankly. And that it really bothers me. I mean, ultimately, I understand that there's always reservations about maybe these guys are bad guys or maybe these guys aren't safe for their kids. If they're not, if they're bad for their kids, you can still like list them on their children's birth certificates. You can still go through the process and then be like, hey, you know
Hmm.
what? This guy's a threat to his kid. We're gonna go through the adopt. Like, it shouldn't have to
Hmm.
be this like legal process of trying to figure out how to squeeze these guys out of their kids' lives so that an adoption agency can make money. And yeah, with the whole Lynn's Jack situation, I mean, there's so much to say. She said so many awful things and commented a bunch of awful things. And I'm 100% with you. I haven't talked about it really in my videos, but I 100% think that she's just using all of this to try to get a private match with adoption, um, which is just so gross and frustrating for me. With all these influencers that have solicited fans for babies, and she's not outright soliciting people. I guess she's not begging them for a baby, but you might as well. Like, I don't know, anyone who is hoping to adopt and is making all this content about how wronged they are by not being able to acquire a baby. That's kind of the
Hmm.
implication.
It's the gray
Um,
zone.
and for her to think that, I think it says a lot about the adoption players she's working with because I don't know. It's just everyone that kind of works with the same adoption consultants that I tend to notice. All these influencers work with the same people, and all these
Hmm.
influencers tend to seem to do the exact same thing. They tend to always ask their fans for a baby, and then once that doesn't work out, they go through it, and then they're posting about it on social media. And it almost feels like a lot of these adoption players. Uh, First of all, I mean, want to leverage these influencers to launder their reputations, and then second of all, actually are just kind of the mindset that all good press or all press is good press, and that like
Hmm.
even if you make yourself out, who knows if Lindsay? I mean, I think that she probably has some racist tendencies, but even if she's not, and she's just doing it to rage bait people and increase her follower count. The fact that she thinks that this type of content and the comments that she's posting are going to make it more likely for her to adopt a child, I think says a lot, not necessarily about her character, but about like the adoption player she's working with, that, she's being
Hmm.
encouraged to post what she's posting in the manner that she's
Yeah.
posting.
Yeah.
And really, when you look at like, I mean, as well as I do probably that all these adoption consultants and stuff, I mean, there's a bunch of statewide and federal legislation that they're trying to get rid of these players because, they're like, quite honestly, they're
They're
horrible. I mean,
floundering right
they're
now.
flying people all over the country trying to get their kids, or trying to get people to give birth in different states so they have less, legal rights to be able to parent their own children. And you can already see like some people are going out of business, and then the ones that are going out of business are going to pop up in different states where the laws are friendly.
Hmm.
It's really gross. It's really bad, and it's insane that the faces of adoption have ended up being these influencers who are saying, like, actually, the adoption consultants are really good at finding you these ethical adoption agencies. I'm not going to publicly say the adoption agency that Lindsay worked with, but I looked at their website and it's like horrible. It's like all these adoption agencies, they don't even pretend to be impartial. It's like all of them want you to choose adoption, and they're impartial people. Will talk all about the benefits of open adoption and how it's so great. And then when they talk about parenting, they talk about all the hardships, and it's like. Is there no hardship to potentially never seeing your child again? Is there no hardship to, thinking about your child or seeing your child and then having to, go home and for on that hour long or 3 hour long or whatever drive or flight and think about when's the next time I see my kid or am I ever going to see my kid again? There
Yeah.
are, so many issues with all of it. And for these adoption websites and entities or whatever to just, only list the positives of adoption and then only list the hardships of parenting, it makes
Hmm.
me furious. And that's stuff I didn't even talk about in the video, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I'm really glad that we get to talk about this because it makes it apparent, especially if you have been watching so much of the content like we have for so many years now. There's a pattern, there's like a playbook that like all these inf adoption influencers and these agencies are all working on, and they won't outright say it. But if you look at like the patterns that they go through, like just like you said with the birth fathers, they don't want them to sign the birth certificates. They don't want them present. Like this is like an unspoken rule in these agencies where they'll even like tell the adopted parents sometimes. Like I've spoken to some adopted parents, they'll be like, "Yeah, they told us like don't ask about the birth father. It'll work better for you if you don't know any information. You leave them off the birth certificate. It makes the whole like process go faster because you don't have to worry about getting signatures and whatnot." And these are just different tactics that are used, and it's all done purposefully. And I think like that's an important aspect where like your videos are showing people like, hey, she didn't mention a lot about the birth father except for just in passing, and people aren't really thinking about that. But this is what you need to like take into consideration. Like, wait, what? Like these birth fathers were present. Why is she painting them as X, Y, and Z? Like, why didn't the adoption agency involve them more? Like, why are we just focused on the birth mother? And just like these different conversations where I think like the average person, when they think about adoption, they're like, oh, you go to an agency, they have to follow these strict laws where these parents have to jump through all these hoops because that's what you see in movies where they have to spend all this money, they have to do X, Y, and Z, like a million different applications, fees, tests, whatever. And then they have to wait a really long time to get a baby. And not thinking, like you said, like this was a woman who was able to match with three different pregnant people in crisis. And right now, like we've been in a baby bus where there are not enough newborns to keep up with the demand. Like we have like hundreds of hopeful adoptive parents, and now there's a lot of single parents, hopeful parents that want to adopt as well. So the pool is just increasing, increasing. But meanwhile, like you said, like it's all involved with like politics and government. We have like Project 2025 and like different adoption agencies and different like laws in certain states. I think it was like Tennessee that I was just looking at the other day, that said like the adoption agencies are allowed to consider like their religion in their policies and whatnot.
Yeah, they're trying to let basically private foster or like Christian agencies take over the foster system in Tennessee and discriminate against people who are not like that's the thing. It's so funny you say that because that's a video I've wanted to make for a while. People are like, "Oh my gosh, these foster agencies are going to discriminate against non-Christians." And it's like, yeah, do you not realize that like that has literally been the private adoption marketplace for like 100 years? This is
Yeah.
normal. The only thing that's different about this is that now it's happening in foster care, but this has always been the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
And now they're like proudly sharing that. They're like, these are our values. So like we can in good faith do this. Like we're a good Christian agency. Meanwhile, they're putting ads like, oh, like we want what's best for your child. Policies and state laws are like saying that you have to do like the best interests of the children. And meanwhile, now these agencies are like, well, we decide with the best interests of the
Yeah.
children based on our religious ideology. And we're proudly saying that with our full chests now because they can be comfortable with that with the current state of our government, where there is a lot of discrimination and there is a lot of like outwardly just like making laws and policies that make it hard for diverse applicants like Black and brown people. We have LGBTQ plus, we have single parents, income thresholds. We have even like health thresholds. Like I was talking to my mom the other day, my adoptive mom, and I was saying like, yeah, some agencies like have weight limits on like how like heavy an adoptive parent can be, and they have to fill that on the application. If you're above a certain BMI, they won't allow you to adopt. They have age
Interesting.
limits, like
Yeah.
different things like that. And these policies are put in place supposedly to protect the children.
Yeah, it's all
And
really arbitrary too. Like, I mean, it's horrible. You can look at, I have my adoptive family and my adoption papers. They got to choose which races they're interested in, which races they're not interested,
hmm
all this different stuff. It's like it's very frustrating. And yeah, like their criteria. It's interesting that they're putting stuff in about trying to be more, I guess, selective about who's adopting because it doesn't really feel like they've ever been historically that interested in anything other than just discriminating against people based on their race, marital status, sexual orientation, or religion. This really
hmm
seems to be the only four criteria for most adoption agencies throughout the course of history. And granted, I mean, like black families literally weren't allowed to adopt until after the
hmm
civil rights movement. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. And then not to mention like the struggles that come afterwards with like police being called and like people thinking that you're stealing kids. And it's just like there are just so many things that go on that people don't want to talk about because it makes it apparent that this system is flawed. And I think that's like the like biggest point a lot of us are trying to make is just like this system is flawed, changes need to happen. Because at the end of the day, the goal of like hopeful adoptive parents and the goal of agencies is supposed to be like to help children. And as adoptees, like we know a lot of the struggles that go on. Like you're an open adoption, I'm an international adoptee, a transracial adoptee. Like we know a lot of the struggles, but at the root of it, it's like we're not many of us aren't just out here just complaining to complain. Like we are bringing awareness to these issues, these very real issues that are still affecting children, that are affecting many more children that are coming into adoption. And a lot of these places too are trying to make adoption easier. We see like our government trying to pass more tax breaks and more
Hmm.
laws to make adoption easier. We see things like in Utah where like you said, they take women and pregnant people from out of state, bring them to a state where it's easier to adopt, and then, go through this whole process just because it's faster and they can make more money. But like I said, like I feel like we are at this turning point where adoption agencies are now floundering too
It's
because
changing. Yeah, they're getting
because
scared.
yeah, because we have some laws in this whole mess coming into place, and like things like the FTC sending warnings to like consultants and whatnot, where like some agencies literally had to shut down. Some agencies literally can't afford to do international adoption anymore because it's becoming so infrequent and the laws and everything are so difficult because other countries don't want to place children here because of the dangers and etc., all that stuff. So it's, I think, even more important to look at like these viral stories to see like what is happening and really think like why these agencies, why these consultants, why these adoptive parents are ignoring these red flags, are sharing these stories in this like positive light and like have hope, let's continue on this journey together, making like an experience where we see other influencers who are just like, help me pick out my new nail color of the week. And like you get to interact and like choose on the story, whatever. It's almost like that in a family content package where it's just like,
Hmm.
oh, well, I'm going to go on a new adoption journey and like I'm going to start out with this consultant or this agency, follow along for my journey. Let me know what outfit I should wear to meet my new baby or stuff like that. Like it's gotten to the point where it's just like it, it's very superficial, and it it's packaged perfectly for a reason.
Yeah, it's been like that for by design forever. I mean, it's always, I don't need to go into the Georgia Tan spiel. Everyone has probably heard at this point. I mean, the whole industry is predicated on that. It's this consumer marketplace, and
Hmm.
Georgia Tan began the process of stealing birth records. She began the process of advertising an adoption. She began the concept of infant adoption. A lot of these things literally did not exist prior to a human trafficker trafficking children and making a bunch of money off of it. And these adoption agencies, for many, many years, good book for people to read is the Baby Thief by, I think it's like Barbara
Hmm.
Versantes Raymond. It's the story about Georgia Tan. But basically, all these adoption agencies for a very long time are like, you know what? We see this black market adoption stuff happening. We're going to try to compete with them. And then once we can beat the competition, then we'll like, make everything good and like quote unquote ethical or whatever, and things
Hmm.
won't be as bad. And then they try and they try and they try, and ultimately they kind of become the thing that they're trying to fight against. I mean, look, I don't know how many good adoption agencies there are out there. I'm not saying there's zero. But I've listened to adoption consultants on podcasts, on their own podcasts, say like one specific adoption consultant I have in mind who said, there are only three adoption agencies that I fully trust in the United States. And she was not saying that to say like adoption is really broken. She's saying that like, well, I'll work with anyone, but like, there's only really three that I know like are not doing totally shady stuff all the time. And I'm just like, do you not see how much of a problem that is that you're admitting that, but then you're working with not just only these three adoption agencies, you're totally willing to work with all these other adoption agencies that are, using really predatory tactics to acquire children. It's always been, a marketplace for children. And I think it's very easy for people to blindly go into the process because that's kind of how we're conditioned as a society, is just to believe that
Hmm.
adoption is great. There's all these wealthy adoption agencies and these adoption lobbying groups and the Heritage Foundation and all these groups that have something to gain out of us thinking adoption is beautiful. The Heritage Foundation loves to talk about adoption because the Heritage Foundation thinks that, or they look at adoption and they see that we have these private institutions that are not government run, that are faith-based, that are able to discriminate against non-Christians, that get to decide where these children end up. And why not, celebrate this institution that is, not only converting children to our preferred religion, but also,
Hmm.
it's not the government doing it, and it's like, yeah, adoption is like an overtly political institution. So it's always funny to me when I get comments on my videos like, "Why are you making adoption political?" It's like adoption is literally by virtue of being adoption political. Like adoption doesn't
Yeah.
exist in a lot of these other countries, or at least to the extent it exists here. And really, like I look at adoption as like I really look at it almost primarily through a political lens at this point. It's what happens when our societies fail to take care of their people. Like the
Hmm.
reason children are sent from abroad to the US is because these sending countries can't take care of their people, or at least they're inadequately doing they're not doing as good of a job as they wanted to. The United States, has children in our systems or ends up having children that are adopted privately or through the foster system, whatever, because we can't provide enough resources to these families. Granted, yes, there are just, circumstances where children might need external care for some reason or other. I'm not saying there should be zero adoptions ever, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what the like. I don't need. I think like so many people expect an end solution out of all of this from us, when really what I'm concerned with or what I'm interested in is just bringing awareness to the fact that if we had social safety nets, if we had the bare minimum that the rest of the developed world has, in Europe or Australia, New Zealand, whatever, that many thousands of these adoptions are taking place each year would not need to exist. Like we would
Hmm.
not need to have this. And, sorry to the people that want to build their families that way, but adoption was never supposed to be a family building tool. It was
Hmm.
supposed to be this system that is serving children. And really, like it says so much about adoption. I think about this a lot, actually. I haven't really found a way to talk about it in videos that well. That, back before the civil rights movement, and blackness was the worst thing that could exist within these adoptable children. Black children were less desirable than children with special needs, and like
Hmm.
white children with special needs, or even children of color who are not black with special needs. And so you saw some families adopting children with special needs. Then, civil rights movement happens. Now we're a little less, overtly racist towards black kids. And all of a sudden, the less desirable becomes the children with special needs. But really, the question for me has always been, well, why do we give people the ability to choose? Because when you give people the ability to choose, what you really give them the ability is to reject. You give them the ability to say, I'm not interested in this type of children, of this type of child. I'm not interested in children that have these specific needs. When if you're like a quote unquote normal parent, you don't get to opt out of, well, I don't want a kid that has, a freckle on his cheek or whatever.
Yep.
I don't want to raise a boy, or I don't want to raise, a kid that's half Cuban. I mean, obviously, if you whatever, like you might not have to worry about that if you're having planned children or whatever. But like adoption functioning as a marketplace is inherently like antithetical to what child welfare is supposed to be. How can you take care of children when you're giving these people who are supposedly trying to take care of these children out of these children's best interest to opt out of that? Like we have a built-in mechanism to allow people to say, I'm not interested, which is why you see so many of these children that, quote unquote, are like in need of adoption, which is, this kind of BS. It's mostly, children in foster care who are not on the adoption track, not on the adoption track, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, these systems literally are just designed as like family building services, and it says a lot that we group adoption with like surrogacy or IVF when that's not like the way that we looked at adoption when adoption was invented. Like adoption was supposed to be a social service for families, not for the families who want these children to become adoptable. And I know I don't have anything personally against people who are interested in adopting. I just think that most people who look at adoption and are interested in adoption don't really tend to look at adoption through a lens of really any lens that has anything to do with reality. They look at it through the stories that are told in the media or through the propaganda that these agencies and these lobbying groups like to kind of introduce to the public. But I mean, adoption is what happens. Adoption is a failure. It's a failure of a child to be. To be kept within its family, within its community, within its culture, I was adopted.
Mhm.
I have an Irish father. I didn't grow up Irish, and even if my mom, I guess, raised me as a single mom in the U.S., I would have lost out on that. But like, there's a level of loss that exists within every single adoption, and for these agencies to kind of say, oh well, it's a place. We can hold grief and joy at the same time. It really ignores the fact that the grief exists because, like, the joy is built on that grief. It's not just
Mhm.
that these two things that ex happen to exist together. One can only exist because of the other, and
Yeah. I
and
think that's
yeah.
also because we're in an individualistic country where like we're all thinking about like what the best needs for us, for our individual family. So like if we were to take in, if the group as a whole who are interested in adoption would just be honest and be willing to look at everything through a clearer picture with a clearer lens, it would be very, very easy to see these red flags pop up. But because we are so focused on our immediate needs and our, well, needs,
Wants,
quote unquote
yeah.
needs, wants, desires, and just like what fits us most, like you said, like choosing different types of children and all this stuff, like it's so easy to have shields up to the reality of what's happening out there. You're raising a kid, like their needs and priorities, like they're gonna come first. So then you forget about this whole other thing that you participated in, and like people think like adoption ends. But
Yeah,
it's just like this ongoing thing that has effects throughout the kid's life, about their kids' lives later on. So yeah.
that's a good point you make. I mean, they want that's the agencies designed it that way. For forever, it's been designed to be kind of just a past tense verb, right? We were adopted. We're not adopted. Like I think that's actually part of the positive adoption language that we're not adopted. We were adopted. I could be wrong
Mhm.
about that, but that's the whole thing. They want it to be this past tense event because then we're quote unquote, that we're quote unquote normal, right? We're normal. The adoptive families are normal families, no different than anyone else. They got to cut the umbilical cord. We're not any different. And it really just, trivializes like the issues that we have, or really erases a lot of um, the feelings that we have about this stuff, because it's not like I'm still adopted. I always will be adopted. I will never be able to have the normal relationship with one of my families that like people have. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I love my family. I love like the connection I have with my mom and with my siblings and all that. But you can't you can't go back in time and grow up together. It doesn't work like
Mhm.
that. and I know that there are some adoptions out there where people have really, really close relationships with their family. I've heard of like very few where it's like a quote unquote open adoption and the adopted person sees their family a lot. But I think by and large, that's not really how the system functions. It's designed to, like to your point, like cater to the desires of people who are hoping to adopt. And yeah, I mean, that really shouldn't be the goal of a child welfare system.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for
I,
having
I
me.
really appreciate it. I'm sure like we get to talk for hours.
Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review, and check out my books from your local library. For more conversations on adoption, check out Adoptee Thoughts on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to learn more about my work, head over to adopteethoughts.com or search Adoptee Thoughts on any social media platform. And remember to keep leaning into the uncomfortable, because that's where real growth happens.